So welcome to this evening, which is the season finale of Generally Speaking, a series of conversations with third-generation Holocaust survivors, hosted by the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust in New York. The series has been hosted by Stephanie Butnick, the deputy editor at Tablet Magazine and co-host of the leading Jewish podcast, Unorthodox, which you should listen to if you haven't. And so we're very glad to have Stephanie back tonight. We are presenting our fifth and final program in this series with Maccabiah USA, and we're delighted to have Derek Sheldon with us. Derek is a brand marketer in Northern California with a background in sports, business, and economics, and he devotes a lot of his time to being a coach and team manager for Maccabiah USA. His work has been inspired by his incredible family story, which he'll share some of this evening. Please feel free to share questions and comments in the Zoom chat throughout the program, and Stephanie and Derek will get to as many as they can. So without further ado, thanks again, everyone, and take it away, Stephanie.
Thank you, Ari, and thanks as always to the Museum of Jewish Heritage for putting on this wonderful event, to Maccabiah USA for being part of tonight's event, and of course to Derek Sheldon. Thank you for being my guest tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Absolutely honored that my name was brought up for this great opportunity. I'm very excited to be with you here tonight.
And I think a lot of your family is here. So a lot of your family and friends, so no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure at all. Shot it off a text thinking maybe a few people would join, and everybody in the family's on. So I have to make sure I'm on point tonight and can't mess up any of the stories too bad.
This is great. So everyone can fact check us. Derek's family can fact check us in the chat or the Q&A. This is a particularly auspicious night to be together. Tomorrow is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. So I think that gives tonight's program a bit more meaning. And I think it, just reminds us how important it is to gather together to share these stories. And, something I really like about this series is that it focuses on the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, people who met these survivors when they were a bit later in their lives, after they had families and reestablished themselves in other countries. And Derek, I'm really excited to talk to you because your grandfather Max has a really interesting story. He has, first of all, actually, where are you? Let's do some formalities. Where are you coming to us from?
I'm out in California. Ari had a great introduction. I'm in Northern California, born and raised on the West Coast. Traveled around the West Coast for college, for work. Lived for a couple months in Israel as well, about 7 months in Israel. Actually stayed on the kibbutz that my grandfather lived on, and we'll get into that in the story. But Northern California, love it out here. I know you're out in New York, and it's a phenomenal place to visit. And hopefully one of these days we can actually connect in person.
That would be great. Hopefully it's not snowing outside in New York when we do that. So let's start with a brief telling, if you don't mind, of your grandfather's story. It's different from a lot of the stories we've heard, and it involves the Maccabiah Games, or Maccabiah. We could get to all the pronunciations, but the Maccabiah Games, which I know a lot of people listening might know a lot about. Some people might know nothing about. So basically, tell us about your grandfather Max and the unique way in which he survived the Holocaust.
Absolutely. I want to start by saying, and if he were here, he would definitely want me to clarify, my grandfather isn't a Holocaust survivor in the traditional sense. He never went to a concentration camp. He got out of Germany relatively early, but he and his family did suffer through all of the ramifications of the Holocaust, and his story is really special. And so while he might not be a true Holocaust survivor in the way we might all think, his story has deep meaning and deep roots in Germany and in Israel. And I think it's something special. And it is really cool too that it's connected to these Maccabiah Games, something that has transcended through our family through generations, and I hope will continue to transcend to further generations. His story is interesting. It started out in Leipzig, Germany. He was born there, youngest of 5 children. Both of his parents had immigrated there from Poland, and they had a pretty successful life. Things were good. His parents had a fur business that was doing well, that was very successful. And Max, my grandfather, was a very athletic young boy. He participated in the Barkoba in Leipzig. Barkoba is kind of like an original JCC. It's where young Jewish athletes could go and play sports. It was separate from the normal sporting clubs that were in Germany. It was only for Jewish athletes. They wore uniforms with the Star of David that they were proud to wear. It wasn't something that they were necessarily forced to wear out of shame. It was something that they got to wear out of pride. And actually, I think Ari was able to find a picture of one of these uniforms and some memorabilia from Leipzig, Germany that my grandfather may have well had, and he'll show some of this as we go through. But it was really a phenomenal upbringing. That Ari, if you want to, you can go, since you brought it up, we can go through now and we can kind of touch on that as we get into the story. That's my grandfather. I'm guessing around 80 at probably his 80th birthday party back here in the United States. So he had a great upbringing, participated in sports. That's him on the left-hand side, with the X above, second in from the right. That's him running the 100-meter race in the third Maccabiah Games. We'll get to that part of the story. And him on the right during tryouts. He was a decathlete in Germany. So participated in numerous sports and was really a center of the community. Was a great student. And things seemed to be going really well as he was growing up until about 1933 when he was 16. Max said in his own words that he could start to feel things were different. He would go to these sporting events and he would win and not get the recognition because he was a Jewish athlete, or he could tell that the other athletes weren't as comfortable around him or didn't respect the Jewish athletes, and things started to seem a little bit weird. And over the next 3 years until 1936, he began to understand what was happening in Germany. He began to understand the Nazi Party is rising, the economy is bad, and due to all the situation in Germany, things are starting to get out of control. And he starts to tell his family, look, we might need to leave. Things aren't good here. We may need to get out. But being the youngest of five, nobody really listens to you, the runt of the litter, right? Nobody really necessarily pays attention to what you're saying. Fast forward to 1936, he's now 19 years old and getting ready to go to law school, right? Just like every young kid, very excited, gets to go to law school, gets to fulfill his dream. And that's the same time the Nuremberg laws come into effect. He can no longer go to law school. And at this point, boycotts are happening on Jewish businesses. Their business, his family business, gets shut down. His father actually suffers a stroke in 1936, and things are starting to look a little bit worse and a little bit worse. And again, he says, we should probably leave. And so far, everything is bad, but it's not too bad, right? There's still hope. So the family decides to stay, and it's hard to leave your family, right? It's hard to be the youngest and pick up, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? By 1937, Max's father passed due to the stress of everything that's going on. Things are starting to get a bit dire. During that same time, Max's older brother had gone to Israel for the Maccabiah Games. So rewind a little bit back. We're talking about Bar Kokhba, these athletic events, these regional athletic events throughout Europe. These pre-existing JCCs formed together and helped create Maccabiah Games in Israel. These took place in Israel every couple of years, and it was a way for Jewish athletes to get together in Palestine at the time and to participate in sport. So his older brother went and comes back and goes, Max, you're a Zionist. You love Israel. You're a phenomenal athlete. This is your opportunity. Go to the games, prepare for the games, and go see Israel or Palestine for yourself. So 1938 comes around, and Max is now 21, bright-eyed, strong, excited, has the whole world in front of him. Goes to Israel, travels with a delegation from Germany for the third Maccabiah Games. They go at the very end of March, and within the first couple days, beginning of April, Germany annexed Austria, and things start to get bad in Europe. Great Britain, who was in control of Palestine at the time, shuts down the games and say the games are done, everybody go home. Well, a bunch of 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds, they don't really listen, right? They kind of do what they want to do. And so they actually did hold the games. Ari was showing a picture earlier of my grandfather running in a sprint. They held miniature games in Tel Aviv to kind of keep the spirit alive. And the games went for about 3 weeks. While my grandfather's there with these games, he gets a letter from home. Look, Max, things are bad. Things have gotten worse while you're gone. Since the annexation of Austria, the German society has gotten worse. His brothers, his sister are all planning on leaving Germany. His mother's planning on going back to Poland, where she has some family. And they say, you're a Zionist. You love Israel. You're already there. Stay there, please. He goes, all right, good idea. And ended up staying illegally at a kibbutz called Kfar HaMaccabi. Interestingly enough, that is now where the headquarters for Maccabi World Union is located. There's a Maccabi hotel at that facility, at that site on the kibbutz. I've stayed there. Team USA, we actually have a facility there that we help manage operations out of during the games. And so it's really kind of cool. There's a museum there that my grandfather's in. So it's come full cycle of that happened to be the place he chose when he was 21. And all of these years later, it still is a special spot for Maccabiah and for the family.
So what happens? I mean, he's a young kid. He's now on his own. Can you give us a sense of what happens to the rest of his family?
Yeah, absolutely. So finally, they start to heed his call. Things are bad. Things are bad. We need to get out of here. And his family scatters across Europe and really the world. One of his brothers goes to Paris. Another brother goes to London. Another brother goes to New York. And then his sister, following her soon-to-be husband, travels to Rio de Janeiro. And so they all scatter throughout 1938. And leave Europe and leave Germany. Meanwhile, and this is so tragic, his mother goes back to Poland, where they have family. Again, both parents were originally from Poland. Father had passed away due to multiple strokes from the stress of everything that was happening in Germany. So now that the family is spread, they all try to figure out, all right, okay, what do we do next? Max is in Israel, and things are bad right now in Israel. There's a lot of attacks from the local Arab communities that are upset about these illegal settlements. And so both Max and his mother, who's in Portland, decide they want to go to London, to the brother in London. It's safe there. Let's get to London. Unfortunately, the way that visas worked back then is there was a quota of how many people from Germany, they weren't technically German citizens, but how many people from Germany could go into various countries. That happened here in the US and it was happening in Great Britain. My grandfather, Max, couldn't get a visa. They said 6 months, maybe a year, it's going to be a long time. And the same thing happened to his mother while in Poland, kept getting delayed. Fortunately for Max, he was able to get a student visa to Paris. Traveled to Paris to meet his brother there, and was there when World War II broke out. So he's now sitting in Paris. World War II is breaking out. Germany is invading France, and the French government say, okay, any Poland citizens, so technically there were Poland citizens that are living within these borders, must join the army, and you must fight on the front lines. My grandfather said, well, I don't have any allegiance to France. I got to get out of here. I don't want to fight on the front lines. Thus beginning an odyssey of sorts on his journey to the US. And I'll get into that. But to finish the question, his brother in London ended up staying in London. Brother in New York stayed here. Sister stayed in Rio. de Janeiro, and unfortunately, his mother did not have an opportunity to leave. She ended up, incredibly sadly, going to Lodz, which is in just outside of Warsaw, where they had some family. It became a ghetto, and she was living in the ghetto, still trying to fight tooth and nail to get a visa to go to her son in London. And nobody knows for sure what happened, but what we've heard recanting from eyewitness stories passed down from generation to generation is she was actually on her way to a consulate to get her visa when she was stopped by a German police officer, got in an altercation, an argument, and he pulled out a pistol and shot her dead in the street. So an absolutely tragic and terrible story, but one of millions that unfortunately have occurred throughout the Holocaust. But to shine a little bit of light on the story, at least all of her children were able to escape.
So Max makes his way across, basically all of Europe, it sounds like. And then he's in Morocco. I mean, he's in all of these places. Where does he end up settling in the United States? And can you tell us a little bit about sort of the establishment of the American Sheldon clan?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, he went to 5 different countries. I mean, if you can imagine this, being 21, 22 years old, he is in Israel, goes to Paris. From Paris, he goes to Barcelona, and in Spain, they say we don't want any Jews here. Things are bad. We don't want the trouble you're bringing. Has to go to Lisbon, Portugal. They say the same thing. You can't be here. There was actually a suspected spy ring that was going on, and he somehow got caught up into this, and he's fearing for his life. Gets on a boat and goes to Tangiers, Morocco, an Arab country, as a Jew, and still there were these conflicts. Has to go there, and he's going from place to place, completely uncertain and unknown on what's the future, what's going to happen, when will I get my visa to America. Like in trying to go to London, he couldn't get that visa because of a quota of how many people from Germany will they allow in. So he's making his way from country to country all around Europe, finally comes to New York, meets his brother in New York, and settles down in New York. The cool thing is, and he comes here, the US joins World War II. And he goes, all right, this is my opportunity. Finally, I believe in the American dream. I believe in what America stands for. This is my opportunity to get back at the Nazis that have killed my family, that have killed my friends, that have ruined the country that I love. And he joins the intelligence service of the army, goes over to England, goes into Normandy a couple days after D-Day as part of the intelligence service. And because he was a German citizen, he looked kind of Aryan and could speak fluent German. He became an interrogator. And what he would do, he would sit here right across from a prisoner and talk about the great times of Germany and say, hey, look, I'm a sympathizer. I understand what you went through. I don't want to be here. Let me help you get you back to your friends. Let me sneak you out of here. I've been sneaking guys out of here. Let me get you back to where you need to go. And befriend these people. And that's how he would find out information. And it's a truly amazing story of how he was able to use his roots in Germany to help fight against the German Nazis. So absolutely amazing. Comes back to the United States and decides he wants to settle down. Comes out to Michigan, settles down in Michigan, in Detroit, Michigan, meets his wife, has 2 young sons, my father Murray Sheldon and his brother Michael, and sets up shop in Michigan to live his American dream. Starts a real estate business. Things are going well. And at this point he goes, the Maccabiah Games helped save my life. I am a true Zionist. I want Israel to grow and be prosperous. And the way I know that is through these games. And while in Michigan, he helped start the Detroit chapter, the Detroit Center for Maccabiah USA, help build the Maccabiah North American Games, and went on to contribute years over years for Team USA with Maccabi World Union, building tennis centers in Israel for youth athletes. um, doing everything in his power to always contribute back to Israel and contribute back to the games. And that really reflected in our family, bringing us to Israel. My parents, probably absolutely crazy out of their minds, brought me to Israel for my first time when I was 3 years old. Could not have been easy, but it was such an ingrained feeling in our family that Israel holds such a special place. The history, the memories of it hold such a dear place in our family's history that it's something we have to keep close to us.
It's interesting. It seems like it's really easy for us to think of Jews during the Holocaust as victims, right? They were victims and they were persecuted and all sorts of horrible things happened. But your grandfather's story is really one of strength, right? Like that photo of him doing the decathlon. Ari, can you bring that back up? That's pretty
Yeah.
amazing. That's
Sorry, I
not
skipped over a couple of the pictures. There's some amazing pictures I want to make sure Ari gets a chance to show.
because I mean, this is not what we think of. And so I think there's something really empowering, I imagine, that he had this athletic prowess, that someone, that he was part of this strong organization. I mean, has that sort of impacted the legacy of his story in your family in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, everybody's story is different, right? Everybody's Holocaust story and what they went through is completely different. And the special thing about my grandfather's is it is about strength and perseverance. My grandfather always had a saying, or always had a vision of the Maccabi spirit, of a strong, intelligent, driven Jew. And this was the spirit that he always wanted to embody himself, to implement in his family, and to implement into Israel itself, build the Maccabi spirit. You could always hear him saying that. That was his motto, his mantra: build the Maccabi spirit, grow the Maccabi spirit, create strong, intelligent, driven Jews, and bring them to Israel and integrate them into Israel. And that has been his legacy. And it's so important to think about when you think about the Holocaust. Yes, there's absolute tragedy that happened, but there is strength and resilience that has come from it as well. And we must be very critical to understand what has come from these different stories and how to find strength out of them, to learn that lesson and to apply it to everything we do today.
So can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with your grandfather? Are there any sort of memories that stick out from when you were growing up? Any stories you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, my grandfather passed in 2003, when I was young enough to have a couple memories, but not a ton of memories. We never got to sit around a dinner table or a campfire and have him relay a lot of these stories to me. But he was an absolute caring and loving grandfather. From what I've been told, he was pretty strict and pretty hard on his sons, and again, instilling that Maccabi spirit in them. But he was a very caring and loving grandfather. He was very Zionistic and wanting us to always go to Israel. Anytime we would go to Israel to these games, he would come with us, and he wanted to always be involved in our families. And I really think that everything that had happened to him in Germany, seeing these warning signs, getting out, losing both of his parents to the effects of the Holocaust, really instilled in him that he needed to pass down to his grandchildren um, the, the forethought of understand what's happening around you, understand your landscape, have love in your heart, but always be prepared to move on a moment's notice, or to change on a moment's notice, because you never know what's going to happen. You never know if things might change, and shoot, look at the political landscape we have right now. So much has changed, and you always got to be prepared, and you always need to know what's going on. And I think that was something he really wanted to instill in all of us.
He also seems to have instilled this love of sport and involvement with the Maccabi Games. How old were you when you went to your first game? Can you tell us a little bit? I mean, about the games, the modern games, in their sort of current conception and your involvement with them.
Yeah, absolutely. The games have come a long way from a small little put together production back in 1938 with a couple hundred people. I think, in total, there may have been 1,000 people when my grandfather went, today, Team USA is sending over 1,000 athletes to Israel. So it has grown exponentially. An easy way to explain what these games are, if nobody's ever heard of them, is kind of like the Olympics, but for Jewish athletes in Israel. You know, it's pared down, but it's high level of sport, all types of sports, pretty much everything you'd see in Summer Olympics. They even have ice hockey, which is kind of crazy to think about in Israel. As hot as it is, they can still make ice hockey work. But it's an absolute amazing experience. Teams from all over the world, something like 80 countries. So hopefully somebody's fact checking me on this. But countries from all over the world come, sending anywhere from a single athlete to over 1,000 athletes like Team USA. And we all converge together in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv. And it's amazing. Because not only is it about sport, but it's about our heritage. It's about our history. When I go, I've been to 7 games. First game, I was 3 years old. I've been there 7 times now. I've worked them a couple of the last times I've been. And what's truly special, and I hope coming out of this, it lights a spark as well, but seeing youth athletes, especially, going to Israel for the first time and truly understanding the magnitude and the power of our history. The thing I love about the museum putting this on, it's making our history important, and it's bringing our history back to life. When we go to Israel and you see everybody walking around and seeing the historic sites and talking to Holocaust survivors, engaging in bat mitzvah ceremonies. My older sister, had her bat mitzvah in Israel during one of these games. Seeing that come to life and seeing the joy and the spark in these young athletes' eyes is the best thing in the world. Honestly, I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I think that, you know, if my grandfather was here today and could see that, and I'm sure that that's what sparked his interest, that is the true Maccabi spirit today. And that's what's so special about these games. And if you've never been, please go, please get involved. This isn't just a pitch for Maccabi USA, but it's truly important for all of us to understand where we come from and what our stories have resulted in for us today.
You know, it's funny with this series, and of course this is the last installment of the first season. I like to sort of try to tease out some kind of through line between someone's grandparent's story and the work that they do today, whether it's someone who's a writer and I sort of find something in there. It's sort of sometimes difficult to tease out. Usually they agree, you know, yes, I sort of was moved to join this field because of, intergenerational trauma or, the experience of my grandparents. It's actually quite easy with you. I'm looking at you. There's a lot of sports memorabilia, it appears, right behind you. You played competitive sports, you coach sports. I mean, I wonder, how present is your grandfather in this? Obviously being into sports is not the most, you could be into it for so many reasons, but it does seem like there is some real, very strong through line with you that sports is such a part of your life today.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. Again, I didn't know my grandfather deeply well when I was young, and my parents, my dad is an academic. He's a doctor. My mom was a nurse. Both they love sports, but sports wasn't the biggest thing in their life. And I definitely think it kind of skipped a generation with the passion. Sports are deeply rooted within me, and it truly makes sense. And as I was preparing for this interview, I was looking at old videos of my grandfather and hearing old anecdotes from my family, and his passion for youth sports. I kind of breezed over this earlier. He helped build tennis facilities in Israel for high school students, knowing that if they have an outlet for sports to do after school, it's going to keep them out of trouble. He helped build the Maccabi chapter in Detroit, helped build these youth games. His passion was in helping youth develop their sport, their love of sport. And I have found that same passion myself. I played sports. I'm okay. I'm not great, but I love it. I turned to coaching sports, coaching high school and middle school sports. And I truly love, again, like him, the youth aspect of watching a kid develop and come into their own, seeing a kid that isn't confident in themselves. And through playing a sport, through coaching, all of a sudden they feel great about themselves. It's a phenomenal feeling. And it's absolutely something that I know my grandfather had as well. And it's really cool. I had always known this a bit, but to see it here today and to really picture what might be going through his head, it's a true direct shot from his heart to mine.
So I think we might have some more photos. Is that true? Let's
Again,
all right, let's see some photos of Max.
yes. Well, okay. So these are not of Max, but we have these ones are of Max, but we have 40,000 documents and artifacts in our collection at the museum. And in preparation for this evening, we looked at the collection to take a look at whether we had artifacts that spoke to the history of the Maccabiah Games or to people like Max. And we do have some really interesting artifacts. So I will run through them quickly here. This is the Maccabi membership card of Martin Beer, who was living in Leipzig and participating in the Bar Kokhba Sports Club. So I wonder whether he knew Max. This in particular is from 1929. You can see on the right side those stamps. They show that he paid his dues from July through December of 1929.
Good for Martin.
And Ari, yeah, to jump in, it's the exact same club that my grandfather was in, actually right around the same time. And I would not be surprised if Martin and my grandfather had known each other or even competed against each other.
Sort of amazing to consider. This was a gift of Martin's descendants. Now, Derek, you mentioned that there were multiple Bar Kokhba sports clubs in different cities, so I don't know if this is from Leipzig or somewhere else, but this is a sports blouse worn by Mary Offentier, who was a young woman who was part of her community's Bar Kokhba club. I should say that these were named for the ancient Jewish hero Simon Bar Kokhba. After Kristallnacht, when Mary's parents sent her and her siblings to Holland illegally, Mary took the sports blouse with her as one of her most beloved possessions. She ultimately was reunited with her parents, and they were in hiding for 2 years and liberated. So she survived at the end of the war. And this blouse was donated to the museum's collection.
That's amazing. And actually, if you can go back, I probably should have dug even deeper on this. My grandfather during those years, especially 38, was preparing and trying out for the German team for the Maccabiah Games out of the Berlin Bar Kokhba. So there's actually a chance he may have also known Mary. It's just amazing. The memorabilia that you've been able to find and how intertwined it most likely is with my grandfather.
I can't believe I said it. Says Berlin right there, so we do know where it's from. This blouse has been on display in our core exhibition for a long time, and in the Auschwitz exhibition right now. It's a great teaching tool when kids come through the museum. This is a long jump plaque from the Maccabiah Games. You can see it says Maccabi in Hebrew at the top of the right side here, which belonged to Walter Schwenk in Czechoslovakia. Walter was born in Berlin in 1913, and he got out around when Max Sheldon did. He emigrated to the US in August 1938 with his mother, and then enlisted in the US Army in 1943. These were young girls in a Maccabi group in Czechoslovakia in 34 and 35. We don't have a lot more information on them. And then there's a couple of pictures here of athletic activities in the Foreign Wall Displaced Persons Camp. It was the third largest Jewish DP camp right after the war, just southwest of Berlin, not that far from Leipzig also. And athletics, in addition to being about community building and resilience, served sort of a practical function after the war, in which a lot of Jewish survivors were physically and psychologically deprivated. They had experienced torture, and athletics were a way of rebuilding them, their spirits and their bodies. There were also a lot of Zionist groups in the DP camps for whom athletic activities served a practical purpose in training for establishing the Jewish state in the state of Palestine and all that would be required there. So there's a couple photos here from the same album. This was an album that was given to Henry Cohen, who was the American Jewish administrator of the Foreign Wall DP camp. And this is the last one. I think this is particularly powerful to see these Holocaust survivors wearing a Jewish star with pride in 1946 when they were forced to wear it in shame not that many years earlier.
Also, I mean, they don't look how you imagine survivors looked. I mean, obviously it's 46 at this point, but that's like, this is a celebration of strength, which is really amazing to see.
Yeah, aren't these? All right, I'll get out of your hair again, but we have 40,000 objects at the museum, and that was like 10 of them. So we hope you guys will come and take a look at the others.
You know, I'm curious the way in which your grandfather's story either loomed large in the sense that it was discussed a lot in your family. You know, a lot of families either shared these stories, you know, readily, or a lot of families did not share these stories. A lot of survivors really didn't open up until they had grandchildren, when it became sort of easier to talk about this, or they saw the need to talk about this to a new generation. What was your family's experience with this?
Yeah, my family's exchange was interesting. Some of both. It was obviously very present in our minds because of our connection with the Maccabiah Games. We went to Israel. My grandfather in 1997 during the games was one of 12 honorees, international honorees that got to carry in the Maccabi flag as they brought it through the opening ceremonies. He received a Lifetime Achievement Yakir Award and is in a museum. So we were always kind of involved in these games and going to Israel. So we knew that there was a connection. We knew that this was very powerful in his life and something that really truly drove him. But we didn't, we never really discussed much the struggles that it had come through. The journey, the odyssey that he had made through Europe, what he must have felt. Again, thinking 21-year-old, you're on a boat going from one country to another. You don't know what to expect there. You're by yourself. You have a little bit of money in your pocket. I mean, the sheer terror of what must be going through. You don't know what's happening with your family. You don't know if your mother is alive or dead. That we never, unfortunately, talked about. And part of it was we were pretty young when my grandfather was still alive. And we don't think to ask those questions when you're a kid. And now, as time has gone on and we reflect on our history, we reflect on where we've come from, those stories do come out more and more. And it's really amazing that the family has come together. Again, when I was younger, everybody was still spread out. We knew our cousins in London, we knew our cousins in Rio, but never saw them much, never spoke to them much. And as we've all gotten older and realized the importance of our shared history, we've all come together much more. Some of them might be on this call right now listening in and hopefully smiling. And it's truly amazing. I think it's so important and so critical that we don't let our history and our stories die with our grandparents or even with our parents, that these are stories that we continue to talk about, whether they're stories of strength and resilience like our families, or stories of tragedy, because there's always something to learn.
There's almost sort of like opposite parallels, right? Your grandfather's siblings were sort of flung all over the world. I imagine you and your cousins can communicate very easily over Facebook or text or Zoom or WhatsApp or Instagram. I mean, there's so many ways in which you can be so connected. And I also think about this idea of the position from which you and your family go to the Maccabiah Games, right? You are, so it's continuing his legacy, but he went, it's such a time of uncertainty, he couldn't even go back. Like, he went to these games as a kid, as a teen, and could not go back. And so I'm wondering if that sort of resonates with you, this idea of how much easier it is basically to carry on his legacy today.
Yeah, it's amazing. When he first went there and was living on the kibbutz, he tells a story of constantly being attacked, and half of the people at the kibbutz, his close friends that came with him from Germany, getting killed in attacks, and he's fearing for his life, needs to get out of Israel, and gets out and doesn't know when he can return. War is breaking out. Things are getting worse in the Middle East. Not knowing if he will ever be able to return to his homeland of Palestine and the place that he truly loved, and with his Zionist spirit. And today, yeah, you're right. It's so easy to go there. I can book a plane ticket tonight, although right now it might be a little difficult. But you can get over there. You can jump on a Zoom like this and communicate, and it's truly amazing. Last time we were in Israel, the whole family was there, 2016. I'm working with Team USA as one of the team managers, and we're getting ready for the opening ceremonies. And I think about Max was here. This was his legacy. This is our family's legacy. We were so intertwined for so many decades into these games. And I don't want to have that just by myself. I want to share that with my family. And I was able to sneak in my mom and my sister and bring them with me through these opening ceremonies. And we walked through the tunnels and into this massive stadium with tens of thousands of people cheering, fireworks going off, and to have them with me, my family, going through this and experience this not only with thousands of other Jews from around the world, but to think back down, this is what my grandfather wanted, and this was his dream, and we're living it together, and it's become important for us, and it's just truly amazing, and the ease we have to do it almost makes it more important. It was hard for him to get anything done. You can't get on Zoom. You want to get something done, you have to send a letter. I have old letters that he would send my father. Today, I want to get something done. I want to contribute to Israel or to the games. I can get on my phone or on my computer. And so it's almost more important that we stay focused on what's important and what the legacy is, and do something right now while we can.
So I want to invite all our listeners to write in their questions to Derek about his family story, about the Maccabi Games. You can do that in the Q&A or the chat. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about what's going on with the Maccabi Games today. I imagine, everyone's adapting with the pandemic. This is, the Olympics were pushed back. I think probably the Maccabi Games probably had to do some reorientation. When are the next games? What do we know? What's the word?
Yeah, absolutely. So the evolution of the games are absolutely amazing. They take place in Israel every 4 years. And then every 2 years in between, there's Pan American Games and there's European Games. So there's always opportunities to get involved and to play in these sports. It goes anywhere from youth athletes. I think we had some gymnasts in their early teens, all the way through masters. In fact, my grandfather competed in masters tennis, I think in his 70s, and he joked around going, I like playing in these masters tournaments because there's less and less of us participating, so I'm almost guaranteed a medal. I think he might have gotten second place out of 2 people. And so it's absolutely amazing the breadth of sports, breadth of ages. Unfortunately, this pandemic has affected everybody, and it has pushed back the Olympics, which does affect the games. The games have now been pushed back to the summer of 2022. I believe it's going to be July of 2022 in Israel, which is tough. I know that everybody at Team USA was really excited for these games, getting them together, and was planning. We all had the excitement. Everything got pushed. But I know as we get closer to those 2022 games, the excitement's going to come right back.
That's great. And I just want to tell everyone, MaccabiUSA.com is a great place to get all that information. We have a few questions coming in for you. I want to start with the one that came in from your dad, Murray. He wants you to share some stories about your personal participation with Maccabi Games, Pan American, European, and in Israel.
Yeah,
Make
absolutely.
me proud.
Yeah, it's easy to keep the spotlight on my grandfather, but it's absolutely been amazing for me. I would say my involvement truly got started probably 2013. I got a call from the president at the time of Team USA, and he goes, "Hey, I know you studied something about sports in college. I know your family's kind of involved. We've got this new opportunity. Would you like to move out to Israel?" And I was young, and I said, "Sure, let's go." I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know where I was going, didn't know the language. I had no idea what was happening. I packed a couple bags and got on a plane. And I ended up living in Israel for 7 months, traveling all around Israel, traveled a little bit to Europe, actually got to go to numerous concentration camps and really understand the Holocaust in real life. And I encourage everybody to go do that. It will change your life forever. But went to Israel, and to be honest, Israel is the most amazing place in the world. Between the culture, the people, the history, the religion, it's phenomenal. So moved to Israel, learned the language, traveled around, worked with different schools, different programs. had an amazing time and really developed my love of Israel. Ever since then, I've participated with the games as a form of a team manager, whether it's been for a sport or a region. Working with them, I've gone to Santiago, Chile. I got to experience New Year's in Santiago in 2015. Something I never thought I would do. It was such an amazing experience with the Pan American Games, and it's so special. And I've stayed, like I said at the beginning of this, I stayed at the hotel at Kfar HaMaccabi, at the kibbutz, and on the site they have a museum that my grandfather is in, and I went there and saw his plaque and reminded myself of his mission, his legacy, and it was so special. But I never knew he had lived there until I was doing some research. I knew he lived in a kibbutz. It was in Israel. I thought it was somewhere more central. Just my mind wandering. And when I found out that was the kibbutz he stayed in, and I stayed there as well, it was amazing. Absolutely transcended everything about his story, and it's so special. And I am so ingrained in these games and in Israel that I hope to bring my family there one day, and to pass along to my grandchildren, hopefully, that same special feeling.
So we have a few questions about the games. Someone's asking, how does one qualify? And then, is volleyball played at the games?
Yes, volleyball is played. Qualifications, I'll try to be general because I'm not the one picking teams, fortunately. But my understanding is most of the athletes, you need to be at the top of your game. Again, this is high level sports. It's Division I athletes. It's former or current Olympians that are participating. We pushed the games back because we do have Olympic athletes that are participating. Professional athletes at their sports. It's the highest level of athlete, of Jewish athlete. So you need to be good at what you're doing. You need to be Jewish. And that's about it. Depending on what the sport is, what the age range is, there are youth sports. There's open sports, which are kind of, in your 20s. That's what we would see for most of the Olympic athletes. And then there's also senior and masters, some older athletes. If you want to get involved, they've got masters ping pong. So you can never be too old or too out of shape to play a sport. Not the ping pong, you got to be out of shape. But there's something for everybody. And I will say, if sports aren't your thing, if you're not a great athlete, I played sports, but the sports I played weren't offered. There's always opportunities to get involved with management, with coaching, with helping with logistics. There are more than enough jobs to go around, and we can always use volunteers.
I love that. We have a lovely note here from Fred Schoenfeld, who said he had the privilege to have known your grandfather and he was a driving force always, which is, a beautiful tribute. And someone's asking if your grandfather ever entertained the idea while he was in Germany to compete on the German Olympic team, or whether that was available to him, or if you know anything about that.
Yeah, absolutely. The question was never asked, but understanding the dynamics and the timing, it wasn't something that would be possible. At the time that he was preparing, and really at the peak of his athletic abilities, this was 1936 to say 1938, probably 1940 if he could have stayed in Germany. And that's during the Nuremberg laws. That's during everything that was happening with the Nazi Party, all of the new punishments or new laws that were happening for Jews. It would never have been possible for him to compete on the Olympic team, unfortunately. But that is great to hear that somebody on here knew my grandfather. I do get stopped every now and then when I'm in Israel or with the games, and hey, I knew your grandfather. He was such an inspiration, and that means so much. This amazing story, I have to include it just because it's so unique. When I was living in Israel, I was traveling around Europe, and I was in Warsaw. I had just gone to a couple concentration camps, and I'm sitting in a synagogue in Warsaw, listening to the rabbi talk about what was happening in Warsaw at the time, current events, and talking about the history. And he's talking about, we start getting into, my grandfather's from Poland, lived in Germany, he lived in Germany. And it turns out after we're talking for 15, 20 minutes, he knew my grandfather.
Wow.
And after all of these decades, I happened to be in Warsaw this one night while this rabbi is there. And he happened as a kid to know my grandfather from Germany. They both had escaped. He had come back to Poland, and it was mind blowing. So anytime you can get these stories out and you can speak these stories and bring our history to life, it's amazing what you find. And it was just the coolest thing.
So we have a tough final question for you, which is, what is your favorite sport and why?
It's very tough. Any sport I get to be a part of. I was always a lacrosse player. It was a very fast sport, lots of impact, really, really cool, pretty unique on the West Coast where I grew up. It was a big East Coast sport, and it was pretty unique over here on the West Coast. So that was a favorite sport of mine. But with these Maccabiah Games, I've fallen in love with rugby. The rugby team is absolutely awesome. It's a fun sport, has some similar attributes to lacrosse, and it's something I wish I had picked up as a young kid. Although my mom is probably happy I never did.
Someone is asking if your grandfather ever returned to Germany after the war.
I don't know. He never did, to my knowledge, as long as I was alive. And I don't think he did. I think he had no problem going back to Israel, had no problem talking about Germany to my understanding, but I don't think he ever returned. Somebody might be able to fact check me on that one.
Dad, are we here? No, Derek, this has been really just so fascinating to hear your family's incredible story of strength and perseverance. And it's great to be with you on the eve of International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Thank you for being here with me. And let's bring Ari back on to close us out.
Yeah, Stephanie, I just want to say thank you to you and Ari. It's such a special day, on the eve of such an important holiday, but also thank you for bringing this story to life. I know it means so much to myself, so much to my family. Thank you to Maccabi USA for thinking of me, bringing my name up. Thank you to both of you for hosting this. And let's keep these stories alive.
Thank you both so much for being here with us. And I should say, as a Jewish person who's not good at sports, there's this, I know the stereotype well that Jews are not good at sports. And I think it's important that we help change the narrative through stories like this one. I do want to give a special plug. We have all sorts of programs going on at the museum virtually these days, but a special plug tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday, the 27th, for 18 Voices, a Liberation Day reading of young writers' diaries from the Holocaust. Narrated by Liev Schreiber and featuring Mayim Bialik and other public figures, we will read from the diaries of 18 young people who catalog their experiences during the war. So it'll be, I think, really inspiring and challenging and thought-provoking, and I hope you all will join us. The link for that is in the chat. I also have to mention that all of our programs are made possible by the support of community members like you. So if you can, please consider donating to support our work at the museum, including tomorrow's program. Thank you again, Stephanie and Derek. This has been a really wonderful, generally speaking series. I guess we've had 5 sessions, right, Stephanie?
Yep.
So we'll send out a recording of today's program in the follow-up email, and we'll include the links to the other programs if you are interested in hearing some other 3G stories. Everyone's story is interesting in its own way. So this has been great, and we wish everyone a wonderful and safe evening.
Thanks, Ari. Thanks, Derek.
Thank you, everyone.